At 85, Ringo Starr finally confesses she was the love of his life. I always thought Ringo Starr was the Beatle who escaped the worst of the chaos. The funny one, the peaceful one. The guy flashing peace signs while the world around him burned. Then I started looking into his life after the Beatles, and honestly, it changed the way I see him. Because behind that familiar smile was a man who came terrifyingly close to losing everything, including the woman he would later call the greatest love of his life. And the strangest part? His story doesn't begin with Barbara Bach. It begins with another woman, a teenage hairdresser from Liverpool, who knew Richard Starkey before anyone called him Ringo Starr. Part 1. One before Barbara, the marriage that fame slowly destroyed. Long before the mansions, the movie sets, and the global headlines, Ringo met Maureen Cox at Liverpool Stein Nine's Cavern Club. She was just 16 years old, training to become a hairdresser. He was a drummer in a rising local band that hadn't yet become the biggest musical phenomenon on Earth. What struck me is how ordinary their beginning was. No red carpets, no security guards, no screaming crowds. Just two young people in a cramped, smoke-filled club, falling in love while the Beatles were still fighting for a future.
Then Beatlemania exploded! Suddenly, Ringo wasn't Stein 90 just a musician anymore. He was one of the most recognizable faces in the world, and that changed everything.
When Maureen became pregnant, the pressure from the Beatles' Nine management was intense. The band Nine's image was considered almost sacred, and a married Beatle was seen as a problem. So in February 1965, they quietly married at Caxton Hall with as little attention as possible.
Imagine that for a second. You, Stein 9 carrying a child, your husband is becoming a global superstar overnight, and you, Stein 9 being asked to keep the marriage almost hidden. Their son Zach Starkey was born later that year, and despite all the secrecy, the world found out anyway. But the real problems weren't Stein 9T outside the house. They were inside it. The side of Ringo few people saw. Years later, Maureen revealed something that surprised many fans.
Ringo struggled with a deep inferiority complex. It sounds strange when you, Nine talking about a member of the Beatles, but fame can do weird things to people. The other Beatles were often praised as musical geniuses, and Ringo sometimes felt overshadowed by the very band that made him famous. According to Maureen, he constantly feared being abandoned. He needed reassurance. He wanted to hear that he was loved, and over time, that insecurity turned into controlling behavior.
I didn't 49T expect that part of the story.
Most people imagine the Beatles living a dream life, but this was a marriage carrying the weight of global fame, non-stop travel, and a husband battling demons that the public couldn't see. Then came 1970.
The Beatles broke up. For Ringo, it was devastating. The band had been his identity, his support system, his direction. Without it, he drifted, and that drift became dangerous. Alcohol, isolation, and a marriage in freefall. Ringo began drinking heavily. He turned to substances. His career stalled.
Maureen tried to hold the family together, but the man she had married was disappearing behind addiction and emotional turmoil. By the early 1970s, their relationship was already hanging by a thread. And then something happened that felt almost impossible to believe. The person who entered the story wasn't a stranger. It was George Harrison.
The betrayal that shattered the Beatles. Inner circle. At first, Maureen and George grew close while both were dealing with troubled marriages. What began as emotional support gradually became something else. And then, according to accounts from people who were there, George did something astonishing. At a family gathering, he looked at Ringo and openly admitted that he was in love with Maureen. Just like that. One sentence. Years of friendship fractured in an instant. I can imagine what that room felt like. These were men who had traveled the world together, survived Beatlemania together, changed music history together, and suddenly, one of them was confessing feelings for the other's wife.
The affair eventually became public. George's wife, Patty Boyd, discovered evidence of the relationship, and the scandal exploded. John Lennon was reportedly furious. The image of the Beatles as a tight-knit brotherhood was permanently damaged. What made the situation even sadder was that investigators later found both Ringo and Maureen had been involved in other affairs during the collapse of their marriage.
By then, reconciliation was almost impossible. In 1975, after 10 turbulent years together, they divorced.